Not all superheroes stay uncorrupted by the forces of evil. There have been multiple times where Tony Stark has become Dr. Doom, even though there's quite a bit of gray area. The Iron Man of Exiles issue number 23, created by Judd Winnick and Kev Walker, tends to be the story where readers meet an alternate version of Tony Stark with no empathy. Still a genius, Tony hides his psychopathic nature until adulthood, when a war breaks out between mutant kind and humanity. Tony very masterfully plays both sides, ending by arranging an attack on New York by Victor Von Doom, aka Dr. Doom, the leader of Latveria. Tony uses Doom's attack to justify his ascension to planetary rule, betraying and killing Doom as part of his plan. While Tony is successful, Doom manages to really badly injure Tony, leaving him, like Doom, unable to ever remove his mask again in public. So then Tony claims Dr. Doom's iconic green cloak, wearing it over his Iron Man armor to complete his rise from supposed hero to unquestioned conqueror, and somebody you want to avoid. Created as a clone of Jean Grey and sent in Cyclops' direction after Grey's death, Madeline Pryor seemed doomed from the start. She and Cyclops had a whirlwind romance, which we'll talk more about later, married rather quickly. She had Jean's powers and then gained Asgardian magic for a short time, during which she healed the old wounds of the X-Men and anyone else around her. Unfortunately for Madeline, word reaches Cyclops that Jean is alive. He abandons Madeline and their son Nathan. Madeline and Nathan are attacked by marauders. Nathan's kidnapped. Her son's faith and Cyclops' abandonment put Madeline on a dark path, and she's been a villain ever since. Like his MCU counterpart, the Bucky Barnes in the comics was turned into an assassin after he seemingly died on a mission with Captain America. In reality, he was captured and brainwashed. When Bucky returned as the Winter Soldier, he was one of the deadliest villains, being able to go head-to-head with his best friend. Despite his tenure as a bad guy, I think he's on the side of good now. Yet, Bucky's times as a villain were pretty dark, and it haunts him to this day. And I think it remains one of the more prominent examples of a Marvel hero becoming a villain, if only for a short while. So once upon a time, there was a nice X-Men named Scott Summers. He was reliable, responsible, and level-headed. And then in a long series of attempts to make him more interesting by giving him shades of gray, Marvel kind of killed his character. Cyclops' troubles began in the mid-80s, after he'd mourned the loss of Jean. Like we mentioned earlier, when Scott learned that Jean was still alive after all of that, thanks to some very heavy-handed editorial retconning, he made the jerk move of running out on his family and returning to his first love. Strike one. Years later, in an effort to save his son's life, he merged with Apocalypse, which left him a changed man even after he was restored. Undertaking one really bad decision after another, such as letting a new mutant kill her enemies, Scott was eventually possessed by the Phoenix Force, killed Xavier, and remade the world into a totalitarian state. When that crisis ended, he was sent to prison, but escaped and became a revolutionary, taking a hardline approach to doing whatever is necessary to aid mutants around the world. He even opened his own secret mutant training academy at an old Weapon X facility, which stood in contrast to the New York school now run by Wolverine, which carried on Xavier's original vision. Back in 2004, Wanda Maximoff had a nervous breakdown and launched a magic-fueled attack on the Avengers that nearly destroyed them. Ant-Man, Hawkeye, and Vision were killed, Avengers Mansion was destroyed, and the Avengers disbanded. It was known as Avengers Disassembled, and it paved the way for the launch of the new Avengers in 2006, with A-list characters like Spider-Man and Wolverine added to the roster. Look, in Wanda's defense, learning that the twin boys you had with your android husband were just magical constructs and not real, and that your friends erased your memories of them, I think that would send anybody over the edge. She later made mutants an endangered species. It was all retconned, of course, in order to allow Scarlet Witch back onto the team. Look, her offspring were brought back to life in Young Avengers, and everybody that died and disassembled was eventually restored to life in other titles. But yeah, Wanda did some damage. Superboy Prime, who debuted in Crisis on Infinite Earths as the Superboy of an alternate universe, our real-world universe if you can believe it, is a classic study of good guy gone bad. But at the end of the day, he was just a naive, immature brat who wasn't really ready for the expectations placed on him. Along with Superman and Lois Lane of Earth 2 and Alexander Luthor of Earth 3, Superboy Prime was sequestered in a pocket dimension at the end of that first crisis, as DC Comics' multiple dimensions collapsed into one. Years later, they escaped that dimension in Infinite Crisis, which is when things went bad. Under the manipulation of Alexander Luthor, Prime turned evil, killed the mainstream continuity Superboy, and nearly wrecked the entire multiverse. He stuck around for the duration, becoming ever more unhinged. He signed up with the Yellow Ring's Sinestro Corps, got imprisoned in the main power battery, escaped and caused so much more mayhem, and eventually found his way back to Earth Prime. There his parents had read about his dark deeds in the pages of DC Comics, and were understandably terrified to see him return. The last time we saw him, he was imprisoned in the Source Wall, at the edge of the universe by the Titans. Then the whole New 52 reboot happened, and I don't don't think he's been seen since. In a 1979 X-Men arc, Jean Grey became the Phoenix, a nearly omnipotent cosmic force. It went okay for a while, but you know that old line I mentioned earlier about what absolute power does? Dark Phoenix destroyed an entire star system and threatened the existence of the universe itself, so something had to be done. The X-Men tried their best, but in the end it was Jean herself who ended Phoenix's destructive binge. During battle, Jean's true personality managed to surface just long enough for her to take her own life, ending all of the horror and devastation. A few years later, Marvel folks were like, hey, we want her back. So that whole thing was retroactively changed so that the Phoenix was a separate entity that was possessing Jean, and that she had been at the bottom of the ocean in a cocoon, healing from injuries or something. Well, Jean died a second time after learning to control and wield the power of the Phoenix without it corrupting her. A younger version of Jean from before she became the Phoenix now exists and is stuck in the present, having been brought forward in time. Initially, the Injustice God Among Us line of comics were meant to be nothing more than a tie-in to the very popular video game franchise of the same name, but they soon grew in popularity and took on a life of their own. The basic premise of the plot is the same as that of the game. Superman goes dark following the slaying of Lois Lane and what she was growing, punches a hole in the Joker, then enacts a very vicious and really awful dictatorship over the entire populace of Earth. So Kal-El starts his crazy regime with some really big goals in mind, but he quickly loses track of himself and starts killing anybody who speaks out against him. I'm talking Hawkman, Shazam, Green Arrow, all perish directly at the hands of Clark Kent himself. And that's just the beginning. Batman leads a resistance force against Superman that ultimately succeeds in bringing him to justice, but only after several more years of a lot of things being spilled. I think Hal Jordan is the most famous of DC's Green Lanterns, and he was also one of the first major superheroes to really go bad in a significant way. The events of 1994's Emerald Twilight storyline see him driven to madness by the destruction of his hometown at the hands of cyborg Superman, and he goes to some rather extreme lengths in an attempt to rectify the tragedy. He demands access to the entirety of the main power battery's energy, which results in a fight that sees him kill several Guardians and fellow Green Lanterns, including his best buddy. He succeeds in siphoning the energy, but not in resurrecting Coast City, leaving him as an ultra-powerful supervillain known as Parallax. That remains Jordan's status quo for a number of years before he turns face again, perishes, and then, we bring him back to life and we get that whole retcon. Because, oh yeah, no, Parallax is the fear-based entity controlling Jordan's actions, because we want to make sure he's not guilty. The Reed Richards of the mainstream Earth 616 universe is one of Earth's greatest heroes and greatest minds, but the ultimate version from the Earth 1610 universe, whole other situation. That Reed is also a founding member of the world's Fantastic Four, but then after he takes a much different and darker path. When Ultimate Mr. Fantastic breaks bad, he does so with the almighty power of science. He starts going by the Maker, uses his elastic abilities to grow his brain to disgusting proportions, and starts a cult, living inside a time-accelerated dome, all with the goal of making the world a better place, whether it wants to be one or not. These days, the Ultimate line of comics isn't really being published anymore, but the Maker's still around. He brought himself over to Earth 616 after Secret Wars.
Coming in at number 10, we have Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil. After years of serving as the devil of Hell's Kitchen and attempting to bring justice to the streets of New York, Matt Murdock finally reached a breaking point after his enemy Bullseye destroyed a building with 107 innocent people inside. Taking control of the Hand, the antagonistic group of ninjas he'd long fought against, Daredevil declared martial law over Hell's Kitchen and began wearing a darker costume to show that he no longer cared about crossing the line of killing, stabbing Bullseye in the chest to drive this point home. And while Daredevil's drastic actions would eventually be explained to be partially caused by him being possessed by the beast of the Hand, it still didn't stop him from building a literal vigilante prison in the middle of New York and crossing several lines that he still regrets crossing to this day. Coming in at number 9, we have Bucky Barnes, aka the Winter Soldier. Originally serving as Captain America's young sidekick and friend during his earliest World War II adventures, Bucky was long thought to be dead by Cap and the rest of the world following his disappearance aboard an exploding plane belonging to the villain Baron Zemo. Recovered by a Russian submarine that discovered he was only missing a single arm, Bucky was turned into the Winter Soldier, the most feared assassin in the world for decades with no memory of his true identity. And while eventually Bucky would have his memories restored due to the efforts of an unfrozen Captain America, he still was one of the most dangerous men in the entire Marvel world for many years. Coming in at number 8, we have Jason Todd, the former second Robin and the current Red Hood. Another example of a sidekick gone dark side after their apparent death, Jason Todd was the second Robin after Dick Grayson's retirement from the role, and unfortunately met a tragic end when facing a crowbar-wielding Joker. Years later, Jason Todd would reappear in Gotham City after being resurrected in a Lazarus pit, now dealing out a brand of violent justice that would make even Batman flinch and put him into conflict with many of the costumed heroes he used to call friends. And yes, eventually Jason would have his violent methods tampered down into more of an anti-hero status rather than a villain, but he still did some pretty messed up stuff after first claiming the Joker's former title of the Red Hood. Coming in at number 7, we have Robot from the Image Comics series Invincible. Initially thought by his superpowered teammates to be an artificial intelligence in a metal body, Robot is eventually revealed to be a deformed boy living in a test tube, using mechanical drones to live out his dream of being a superhero. Unfortunately, following an invasion by the Flaxen dimension in which time runs much faster, Robot is trapped within this dimension for over 700 years. During which he takes over their entire planet and begins to see the value of complete control over a population. Following his return to Earth and lying about how long he was actually away for, Robot soon begins to plan for conquering this world as well, and is eventually able to wipe out any superhumans standing in his way before the countries of the world all surrender to his drone army. From a metal teen superhero to the villainous dictator of the entire Earth, Robot has definitely had one hell of a character arc. Coming in at number 6, we have Captain America, or more specifically, the version known as Hydra Cap. Initially appearing to be the main Marvel Universe's Captain America, this version of Steve Rogers had grown up indoctrinated by Hydra's fascist ideologies, and was actually sent to America to kill the creator of the superhuman serum for the Axis powers, but instead wound up deceiving his way into receiving the serum himself. Having replaced the main Steve Rogers during an event that restored his lost powers, this Hydra Cap was able to hide his evil intentions until the pivotal moment that he declared to the world those shocking words, "Hail Hydra." Coming in at number 5, we have the Incredible Hulk, or more specifically, the version that would become known as Maestro. Giving himself a new name after conquering what remains of America following a nuclear winter and a dark possible future, this version of the Hulk has become far stronger than his original gamma-green form, with years of sucking up deadly radiation only improving his ferocity and power. When the real Hulk encountered this warlord version of himself, the only way he was able to finally come out on top was by literally warping the Maestro back in time to be killed by the same gamma bomb that created the Hulk back in the 60s. But even since then, this future version of the Hulk still seems to keep finding ways to return and claim dominion over the world that he claims he deserves to rule. Coming in at number 4, we have Mary Marvel of the Shazam family. The older sister of Billy Batson, Mary was a fan favorite member of the Shazam family and always seemed to have her siblings' backs. However, following an event that saw the Rock of Eternity shattered and Billy Batson having to take the role of the Wizard Shazam, Mary found her powers entirely gone. Feeling alone and useless, Mary was manipulated by the villains Darkseid and Eclipso into taking Black Adam's power instead, intending for her to become the bride of Darkseid in the process. And while this plan was eventually foiled with reboots of the DC Universe since having erased Mary's evil period of her life, this corruption still shows that in the wrong hands, the power of Shazam could be absolutely disastrous. Coming in at number 3, we have the infamous Batman Who Laughs from the Dark Multiverse. In a twisted alternate world where the Joker realizes he's dying and begins a mass killing spree of everyone in Gotham, Batman is forced to finally kill his arch nemesis. Unfortunately, at the moment of death, Bruce was infected with a special brand of Joker venom that completely flipped his moral compass, but left intact all of his intelligence and planning. All of the chaos of the Joker with the brains of Batman. This supervillain is Gotham's worst nightmare come to life ever since he first crossed over into the main DC universe, and has only been able to be defeated with the entire help of the Bat family and a God mode powered Wonder Woman. Coming in at number 2, we have Superboy Prime. A jaded version of Kal-El from an alternate universe known as Earth Prime, this Superboy was the only superpowered hero on his own world, with all other heroes merely being fictional. After this reality was wiped out during the Crisis on Infinite Earths, Superboy Prime became obsessed with recapturing his past glory as the one and only Man of Steel, and slowly twisted into a psychotic version of Kal-El, determined to wipe out every other Clark Kent and destroy the entire multiverse if he has to. All of this goes to show that Superman's power is incredibly dangerous in the wrong hands. Speaking of which, coming in at our top spot, we have Injustice Superman. Hailing from an alternate universe similar to the main DC universe, Superman was the most beloved hero on the planet Earth until a surprise attack by the Joker led to the complete nuclear destruction of Metropolis, and Superman being deceived into murdering his own wife and unborn child. Immediately murdering the Joker in his grief, this version of Superman snapped and declared himself the High Counselor and sole leader of Earth, essentially conquering the entire planet. With a resistance movement led by Batman facing against him, this version of Superman sank to lower and lower depths, and was only able to be finally locked away with the help of the Justice League from the main DC universe, going to show that the only thing truly capable of taking down Superman is another Superman. Coming in at number 10, we've got a bit of an honorable mention for Maxwell Lord. A businessman of the same caliber as Lex Luthor, Maxwell has hopped back and forth between the sides of good and evil many times over the course of the DC Universe's history. And while he might be best known as a villain for Supergirl thanks to the CW live-action series, Maxwell has also been instrumental in helping the Justice League, helping to found the Justice League International following the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths, and even briefly gaining superpowers thanks to a gene bomb. However, Maxwell would soon be back to his morally dubious ways, betraying the Justice League and even killing the Blue Beetle. Not a cool way to use your new superpowers, Maxwell. Not cool at all. Coming in at number 9, we have Terra, the former member of the Teen Titans. Born with the ability of geokinesis, the ability to control and manipulate all forms of rock or earth near her body, Terra grew up as a mercenary working under the tutelage of her master, Deathstroke. And while it seemed that Terra had abandoned her past in favor of a heroic future when she joined the Teen Titans, it was eventually revealed that this was all a ruse. Terra betrayed the rest of the team so that they could be captured by Deathstroke, and while she would eventually be responsible for destroying the prison holding the Teen Titans as she began to regret what she'd done, it still was a brutal betrayal to both the Titans and their longtime readers. Coming in at number 8, we have Jean-Paul Valley, aka Azrael. Raised to be the next in a long line of super assassins created by the Sacred Order of St. Dumas, Jean-Paul was brainwashed for most of his life so that he wasn't aware of his own training. Once he came of age, he adopted the moniker of Azrael and became another dark vigilante protecting Gotham, even briefly taking over the mantle of Batman following Bruce Wayne's intense injuries at the hand of Bane during the Nightfall event. Unfortunately, his time as the Dark Knight was filled with violence and bloodshed, as Azrael began to descend back into his old training's ways, and it took a recovered Bruce Wayne to finally knock some sense into his fellow vigilante. Coming in at number 7, we have Phil Urich, aka the New Green Goblin. Nephew of the famous Daily Bugle reporter Ben Urich, Phil found his life turned upside down when he accidentally fell in a vat of goblin formula after finding one of Norman Osborn's old Green Goblin stashes. Taking the name of the villain, but determined to turn it into a symbol for good, this new Green Goblin attempted to be a hero in Manhattan for a time, until retiring once his equipment began to malfunction. However, Phil was desperate to chase the high of being a costumed hero, and wound up killing someone in a fight over another Green Goblin stash. Adopting the persona of the Hobgoblin, this time Phil was ready to fully embrace his true role as a goblin-themed villain. Coming in at number 6, we have Peter Parker, aka the Spectacular Spider-Man. While the mainstream Marvel version of Peter was luckily able to fight off the influence of the Venom symbiote suit and prevent himself from going full villain, there's a part of the Marvel multiverse where things turned out quite differently. Increasingly relying on the black symbiote suit to ignore all of the negative emotions and regrets that are eating him up inside, this version of Peter Parker doesn't become a dancing emo joke, but rather a darker, more violent, and completely jokeless version of himself, even going so far as to blind and kill the Hobgoblin to prevent him from even thinking about hurting anyone ever again. All of this just goes to show that maybe it's a good thing our Peter Parker took off that iconic suit when he did. Coming in at number 5, we have the mighty Thor. In an alternate universe event known as The Reigning, Thor transported the city of Asgard to float above Manhattan, only for the forces of Earth to destroy the city in an attack that cost tens of thousands of lives. Outraged by humanity's aggression against him, this version of Thor took the name of Lord Thor and began to claim the entire planet of Earth as his own, combining New York and the rubble of his old home into the city of New Asgard. By the year 2170, Thor had complete control over the people of Earth, and while he claimed that they all lived lives of happiness under his rule, Lord Thor was still determined to fight anyone who would wish to change things back to the way they used to be. Coming in at number 4, we have Professor Charles Xavier, or more specifically, the part of his mind known as Onslaught. For years, Professor X has done all he can to achieve peace and prosperity for mutant kind, while not allowing his anger at humanity to get the better of him. But over years of psychically repressing every dark and evil thought he ever had, Xavier had made the perfect ticking time bomb, and when he briefly had a mental battle with his best frenemy Magneto, a portion of Magneto's less held back personality combined with all of the darkness in Xavier's heart and created one of the most dangerous psychic creations of all time, the villain known as Onslaught. Coming in at number 3, we have Billy Batson, aka the hero Shazam. Normally a young boy who uses the power of Shazam to become one of the DC Universe's strongest heroes, this grown-up version of Billy Batson has been brainwashed and manipulated by Lex Luthor for years, convincing him that metahumans are a threat to the entirety of the world in the Kingdom Come universe. Billy would eventually be overwhelmed and use his powers again to destroy the largest metahuman prison on the planet, starting a full-scale super conflict and forcing him into a fistfight with a middle-aged Superman. And while Billy would eventually see that Lex had been manipulating him and would go on to sacrifice himself to prevent a nuclear explosion, it still goes to show that all of Shazam's powers could be catastrophic in the wrong hands. Coming in at number 2, we have the Old Man Logan version of Wolverine. Now, I definitely wouldn't say that Old Man Logan is a villain these days, but if you look back at this guy's origin story, it's just a little bit tragic as hell. In an alternate future of the Marvel Universe where supervillains have divided up the United States of America amongst themselves, it's eventually revealed that Wolverine is the reason there's no more X-Men. On the day the villains united to attack the country, Mysterio deceived Logan into believing he was protecting the mutant children of the X-Men school from evil, when in reality, he was killing his own friends and family. This was such a dark turn for Wolverine to take, even if unintentional, that he attempted to take his own life afterwards, and has spent the rest of his days trying to forget and redeem himself for what he's done. And finally, coming in at our top spot, we have the infamous Kid Miracle Man, aka Johnny Bates. The orphan child of an Air Force pilot, Johnny had the power to replace his body with that of an incredible superhero known as Kid Miracle Man, and served for a time as the classic sidekick of the original Miracle Man. However, after an explosion which led him to believe his mentor was dead, Johnny Bates aged into a ruthless corporate tycoon and became outraged when he discovered his mentor was still alive and had rediscovered his powers. Killing his own assistant to try and show the original Miracle Man just how far he had fallen, Kid Miracle Man was only able to be defeated whenever the original tricked him into saying the magic words that restored his original childlike body. Nevertheless, Kid Miracle Man would continue to be one of the darkest examples of a superhero being corrupted and just how messy the world of superheroics can get. Coming in at number 10, we have the famous Scott Summers of the X-Men, aka Cyclops. For years best known as the leader of the X-Men that has to rely on a visor made of ruby to control the concussive blasts constantly shooting from his eyes, Cyclops eventually found himself at a breaking point after years of family-related trauma, Marvel's most infamous love triangle, and the constant stress of mutant kind constantly being attacked and hated by humanity. When mutants became an endangered species following the events of M-Day, Cyclops began to lead the X-Men in a more extremist direction, and following a conflict with the Avengers over the imminent arrival of the Phoenix Force, Cyclops lost control and wound up killing his beloved mentor, Professor X. And while it can be argued that eventually Cyclops' actions led to a better future for mutants, with Professor X and most mutants now enjoying the benefits of resurrection on the island of Krakoa, nearly wiping out the entire Avengers team along with your own father figure was definitely a dark turn for the guy named Cyclops. Coming in at number 9, we've got another member of the X-Men with Angel. One of the earliest members of the team and enabled with the ability to fly due to the feathery wings on his back, Angel was unfortunately wounded and had to have his wings removed after being attacked by the evil mutant named Harpoon. Traumatized by this turn of events, Angel was manipulated by the villain Apocalypse into agreeing to serve as one of his 4 horsemen in exchange for having his wings returned. Now known as Archangel, the Horseman of Death, he fought against the X-Men until he was finally able to be knocked back to his senses by the actions of Iceman. And hey, what are friends for if not bringing you back from the edge of being an accomplice to superpowered genocide? Coming in at number 8, we have Iron Man, aka Tony Stark. And no, I promise I'm not just talking from Cap's perspective in Civil War, although honestly, Tony did some messed up stuff in that event too. No, what I'm talking about is during an event in the 90s when a variant of the time-traveling villain Kang the Conqueror, known as Immortus, began using the neural link in the Iron Man suit to secretly begin altering Tony Stark's brainwaves. Over time, Tony's morals were slowly eroded until he was an active threat to the rest of the Avengers team, and was only able to be defeated with the help of his own heroic teenage self from the past. And while eventually, through comic book magic, Tony Stark would be returned to his usual status quo, this is still an intense example of just how dangerous an armed billionaire like Iron Man could be without any morals holding him back. Coming in at number 7, we have Sinestro. While he may be best known these days as the arch-enemy of the Green Lanterns, in particular Hal Jordan, Sinestro's origins were a lot more heroic than you'd expect. Sinestro actually used to be one of the most respected members of the Green Lantern Corps, until his overseers began to notice that his sector of space was becoming more and more of a dictatorship, with Sinestro having absolute control over all the citizens he was supposed to be protecting. While he had good intentions to keep the peace, Sinestro was stripped of his green power ring, and in his rage formed the Yellow Lantern Corps to fight back against the group that he believed fundamentally wronged him. Coming in at number 6, we have the Plutonian. Hailing from the independent comic book series Irredeemable, published by Boom Studios, the Plutonian was a what if Superman started killing everyone story years before that premise became oversaturated with projects like Brightburn, The Boys, and the Injustice games. After spending years as the most beloved but mysterious superhero on the planet, the Plutonian loses his mind from the stress of his job and begins a war against the rest of his superpowered brethren by destroying a city of 7 million people. Most of this entire series is about different characters struggling to stay one step ahead of the Plutonians' killing spree, and if you're in the mood for a dark, nearly 40-issue run with a surprisingly interesting ending, I would definitely recommend it. Coming in at number 5, we have Hal Jordan, aka the Green Lantern. The 90s were an interesting time in comics, as the medium continued to mature and tell darker stories after starting along that trend in the 80s, and it led to the attempted reinvention of multiple heroes. And just like Iron Man, Hal Jordan is someone who is taken in a more villainous direction. Following the destruction of his hometown of Coast City, Hal Jordan went mad with grief and killed multiple other Green Lanterns in an attempt to increase his own power. Dubbing himself the new name of Parallax, these rash actions would eventually be justified as being caused by a fear parasite of the same name, but for a time, Hal Jordan was one of the biggest cosmic threats in the entire DC universe. Coming in at number 4, we have Ozymandias from Watchmen. Serving for years as one of the most popular vigilantes in America, Ozymandias, or Adrian Veidt, eventually came to believe that something more drastic than heroics was needed to truly save the world. For that twisted reason, he faked an alien invasion against the world that resulted in millions of deaths to unite America and the USSR against a common foe. To do this, he needed to manipulate Dr. Manhattan, the most powerful being in the universe, into believing he should leave Earth, as to not interfere with Ozymandias' plans. And by the time anyone realized just how far their former ally had fallen and what he planned to do, he'd already done it 35 minutes ago. Coming in at number 3, we have Jean Grey, aka the Dark Phoenix. An X-Men storyline and character turn so iconic that they've tried turning it into a movie on 2 separate occasions, Jean Grey has long been one of the ideal hosts for the Phoenix Force, a fiery power that's one of the oldest in the entire Marvel universe. And while she was originally able to contain all of this power and still use it for heroics, eventually Jean was corrupted by it, becoming the Dark Phoenix and wiping out the planet of Debari 4, ending 5 billion lives in the process. And while it could be argued this is more the Phoenix Force's doing than Jean's, you can still expect to get some suspicious glances if your powers wound up blowing up a planet. Coming in at number 2, we have the Scarlet Witch, also known as Wanda Maximoff. Originally believing herself to be the mutant daughter of Magneto, Wanda is in reality one of the most powerful magic wielders in the Marvel multiverse, and a conduit for chaos magic that allows her to rewrite reality to her will. And after years of being unsure of her own identity and the loss of her children to the demon Mephisto, Wanda finally snapped and used her reality-changing powers to declare no more mutants, kicking off a brand new era for the X-Men as she single-handedly ensured that mutants became an endangered species. Wouldn't it just be nicer to put everyone in a 1950s sitcom again? And finally, coming in at our top spot, we have the Ultimate Universe version of Reed Richards. While the mainstream Marvel Universe's version of Mr. Fantastic has consistently been a hero and inspiration to the rest of the world, his Ultimate Universe counterpart couldn't be more tragically different. Isolated with his thoughts after the disbandment of the Fantastic Four, Reed became obsessed with preventing the destruction of the Ultimate Universe, and eventually became the villainous Maker, willing to do whatever it takes to ensure his universe's survival, even if it meant the complete destruction of the rest of the multiverse. Unlike many other iconic heroes on this list, this version of Reed Richards has yet to become a good guy again, and remains an active threat throughout the multiverse that will surely come up against the real Fantastic Four again in the future. First off, we have Spider-Man's infamous deal with the devil in the super controversial storyline One More Day, featuring the demonic villain Mephisto. While a lot of the entries on this list deal with alternate universe versions of Peter Parker that have gone to the dark side, the Marvel 616 universe Spider-Man Spider-Man has had his fair share of dark mistakes as well. After Aunt May was mortally wounded by an assassin's bullet and all other forms of magical intervention had been exhausted, Peter is approached by Mephisto in the guise of a little girl who offers to save Aunt May in exchange for one thing: Peter and Mary Jane's marriage. While Peter and MJ had noble reasons for accepting the deal, making contracts with demons is definitely a more villainous action than most heroes would take, and has led to many unforeseen consequences in Spider-Man's life ever since. In another example of the mainstream Marvel Universe's Spidey crossing a dark line, number 9 has gotta be when he fought with Daredevil to try and kill Sin Eater. Guilty of having killed Peter's one friend on the police force, Captain Jean DeWolf, Sin Eater was beyond redemption in Spider-Man's eyes, and was nearly beaten to death before Daredevil intervened. And while eventually Peter was able to see reason, he was on the verge of beating a man to death, showing just how blurry the line between supervillainry and superheroics can be. Coming in at number 8, we have the tragic death of Mary Jane Watson in the Spider-Man Reign storyline. In this alternate universe, an elderly Peter Parker gave up being Spider-Man decades ago, and has since let New York devolve into a dystopian police state, with supervillains being led by the city's mayor. The reason for this old Spider-Man's lack of action is unfortunately heartbreaking, with the love of his life, Mary Jane, having succumbed to cancer after too many years caring for a radioactive husband. And while eventually Peter finds redemption and takes back the city, it still goes to show how dark a world without Spider-Man can be. At number 7, we have Man-Spider, the horrific result of what would happen to Peter Parker if he was a bit more spider and a little less man. Man-Spider first appeared when Angel from the X-Men and Peter Parker were both captured by the villain Brainchild within the prehistoric Savage Lands. Brainchild's plan was to devolve his enemies into more primordial forms, and this left Spider-Man with a hideous appearance, even more limbs than usual, and an unstoppable murderous hunger. While he was eventually able to regain his human form without doing too much damage, every time a villain alters Peter's genetics to favor his spider side has led to massive amounts of internal strife and hunger for human flesh. Speaking of which, number 6 has us talking about the Peter Parker from the Marvel Zombies universe, and this guy's got even more of a thing for eating people than our last number. Zombie Spider-Man unfortunately was infected early on when his world began to fall to the zombie plague, bitten by a half-decapitated Captain America. Before he even really knew what was happening, this version of Spider-Man had consumed the brains of his beloved Aunt May, Mary Jane, and even J. Jonah Jameson. While still retaining most of his personality, this version of Spider-Man was motivated entirely by hunger, to the degree that he even joined in a superpowered mob to topple and devour Galactus when he visited the zombified world. Not exactly the most polite table manners, my dude. Coming in at number 5, we have none other than the Assassin Spider-Man of Earth 8351. Over the years, Spider-Man's had many different kinds of web shooters, from homemade mechanical ones to the biological ones of the Sam Raimi films, but this is probably the only version of Spider-Man where the web shooter is just a shooter, meaning it's literally just a gun. Yes, believe it or not, there's a Spider-Man that just shoots people instead of web slinging. Having abandoned New York in his own universe to become an international assassin alongside of Wolverine, this Spider-Man has entirely given up on great responsibility and seeks only to make a living far, far away from the family he left behind. At number 4, we have perhaps the most well-known occasion where Spider-Man was a villain, because he literally had a villain inside his head. That's right, it's the Superior Spider-Man. After many years of being arch rivals, Spider-Man was seemingly defeated by Dr. Otto Octavius when the dying supervillain swapped their consciousness around, leaving Peter Parker to seemingly die in the frail villain's body. While Otto was motivated by the desire to be a better, aka superior Spider-Man, his violent tactics and invasive use of Spider-Bot technology were frowned upon by most every other hero, and it was only after surrendering Peter's body back that Octavius would admit that Parker was the actual superior Spider-Man all along. Coming in at number 3, we've got the evil CEO Peter Parker from the video game Spider-Man: Edge of Time. We've been counting through a list of times that Spider-Man has changed or used his superpowers for evil throughout the multiverse, but this incarnation proves that even Spidey's alter ego can go very, very bad. After losing many of his loved ones in this universe, Peter became CEO of the Alchemax Corporation, determined to use his scientific knowledge and time travel to prevent anyone he loves from being hurt ever again in any timeline, no matter what the cost. This version of Peter has also twisted his uncle's beloved words, using the mantra, "With great powers comes great responsibility and great opportunity, and the only way to live up to all that responsibility is to use every opportunity to get all the power." At number 2, we've got Spider-Carnage, best known from Spider-Man the Animated Series, and perhaps the single deadliest multiverse variant of Peter Parker we've yet to see from Marvel. In a world where Peter had an even rougher life, with Aunt May passing away shortly after his Uncle Ben, this Peter was manipulated and abused by the cloning supervillain the Jackal into believing he was not the real Peter Parker. This mental instability was made even worse by the appearance of a Carnage symbiote from another dimension, which latched onto this Spider-Man's confusion and hatred to create Spider-Carnage, a being with endless, insane rage, but also the intellect of a genius. Spider-Carnage's one goal was to bring about an end to all possible realities, something even Thanos wouldn't consider attempting, and he was only able to be defeated by multiple Spider-Men working together to defeat their twisted variant. Finally, at number 1, we've got the death of Uncle Ben, which is perhaps the defining moment in all of Spider-Man's career. Now, I know it may be a little controversial to choose something from Spidey's origin story as the number 1 pick, especially considering how many evil multiverse stories there are, but in my opinion, one of the best aspects of Spider-Man is that he isn't perfect. Sometimes he makes mistakes, even bad ones, and it's how he reacts and learns from these mistakes that make him such a great hero. When Peter first gets his powers, he initially just wants to become famous with them, and winds up letting a thief go when his wrestling gig is barged in on. It's this thief going on to kill Uncle Ben, and Peter's realization of how badly he screwed up, that fully cements in him that with great power comes great responsibility. You don't even have a single Spider-Man story if you don't have this one villainous moment from Peter, one that he's still trying to make up for to this day, and that, in my opinion, is why it comes out on top.
Number 10, abandoned his daughter. Sort of. In the CW Arrowverse, Flash basically put his daughter in a tough spot where she wasn't allowed to return to 2019 and had to stay in the future, where she came from, the year 2049. Because she had betrayed Barry and Team Flash, he told her to never return to the year 2019 and warned her that if she did so, he would know, as he would sense her presence in the Speed Force. Wanting to see her father Barry Allen again, Nora decided she had no choice but to find another way to travel back undetected. This caused Nora West Allen to ask Thawne about how to use the negative Speed Force, something Barry couldn't sense. As a result, Nora would later decide to confront the consequences of her actions, dying in the process, instead of continuously being on the run for the rest of her life, because she had used the negative Speed Force so much. Unknowingly, the Flash here helped Nora to turn into a villain by rejecting her. Then there was the whole weird thing of how they ran into like an alternate Nora later on, and she was like, "Oh yeah, you guys used to tell me stories about this other version of me that you ran into that died," which is like kind of weird. It's kind of a weird story. Number 9, killing Eobard Thawne. This is sort of a weird one, as although everyone seemed to feel that Barry Allen here was a villain, he was also just attempting to defend himself from a future that had come true before, and almost completely broken him. Barry Allen killed Eobard Thawne after Thawne made an appearance on his wedding day. Barry wasn't marrying Iris here, in fact Iris was no longer around, because before Thawne had actually killed her. Instead, he was marrying his current love, Fiona Webb, whom Thawne, when he showed up on their wedding day, attempted to kill. Fearing that Thawne would once again kill his romantic partner and still traumatized from when he'd likely killed Iris, Barry Allen killed Thawne before he could harm Fiona. However, because Thawne was killed by Barry, Barry ended up on trial, with even his nephew Wally West testifying against him, claiming that Barry had used basically an unwarranted amount of speed and force to stop Thawne. Speed Force, you might say. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more cool Flash lists, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. Mass mind manipulation. Affecting what people know and don't know on a mass scale definitely feels like villain territory, and this is exactly what Wally ended up doing after having one of the worst days of his life. We know it was one of the worst because his now gone Uncle Barry, also known as the Flash, came back just for it, and Barry had said that he would only reappear on the 3 worst days of Wally West's life, so this was definitely one of them. It was after Wally and Linda had lost their unborn children in a fight against Zoom. Believing it would be better for himself and Linda, and maybe even the whole world if no one knew of his secret identity as the Flash, Barry, along with his pal, the Spectre, who had also stopped by for a visit, decided to grant Wally's wish, and everyone was made to forget the truth of the Flash's identity. However, what Wally did not think to ask about or maybe stipulate was how this would affect him, as he himself, it turns out, also forgot. Which, not so great. This not only caused a lot more crime to come about, but also made things worse between him and Linda. Note to self, don't mess with the whole world's memories of me. Number 7. Trapping Zoom in his worst memory. And that previous point wasn't even the worst part of that story. Although making the whole world forget that Wally West was the Flash created a lot of problems, even worse, in my opinion, was what he did to Zoom in revenge for hurting Linda. The two had an epic fight while Linda was taken to the hospital, which spanned issues 199 and issue 200 of the series, that started way back in 1987. Volume 2, if you will. But even more shocking was the aftermath of that fight. Wally of course won the fight thanks to a speed boost from both Bart Allen and Jay Garrick, and to make sure Zoom couldn't strike back thereafter again, he trapped him in one of the worst moments of his life, which played on a loop. The time he had unwittingly sealed the fate of his father-in-law, causing his death and later causing him to lose the love of his life, Ashley. I feel like being stuck in the worst moment of your life forever, that's a pretty bad punishment, I'm just saying. I mean, I don't think it ended up actually being forever because comics, but that's pretty bad. Number 6. Punishing inertia. After Wally West learned of Bart Allen's death, he considered punishing inertia for it by killing him, but then he ultimately decided on a worse punishment for the villain. Worse punishment than death. Wow. A punishment that sounds like something thought up by a supervillain, truth be told. Granted, Wally was hurting at the time, but at the end of the day, he's still a hero, and this punishment ultimately sounds like something that was cooked up by a great speed-based supervillain. Wally used his powers to slow inertia down to the point that he became virtually a living statue, unable to move but still able to hear and see in real time, experiencing the world around but living in ultra slow motion physically. Each blink of his eyes supposedly would take 100 years. Wally then placed this living statue version of the villain in the Flash Museum, facing an actual statue of Bart Allen, forcing inertia to gaze endlessly at the ghost of a man he could never be. Sounds like a horror story. It sounds awful. Number 5. Flashpoint. Unintentionally, Barry Allen ended up as the villain of his own story and the villain of basically the entire universe when he selfishly used his powers to travel back in time to save his mother. Doing this completely altered the timeline and the future for many heroes and characters in the world. After learning of just how much of an issue this had caused and how he was solely responsible for the reshaping of the world from villain Eobard Thawne no less, what a way to find out, Barry Allen realized that in order to fix everything, he'd have to dip back into the time stream and stop his past self from going back in time to save his mother. Even then, it's implied that Flashpoint was the main cause for the multiverse being permanently altered, and Barry Allen himself became one of the people responsible for the existence of the new continuity and reboot known as Prime Earth and the New 52. Number 4. Became the new Black Flash. The Black Flash is a version of Death in the comics, a very specific version of Death. The Black Flash is said to be the version of Death who comes for speedsters when it is their time to pass on. Often, the Black Flash has been seen as a villain in the comics, even though really when you think about it, death is kind of just a part of life and is a concept, so it's not really inherently evil when you think about it that way. Still, from the perspective of those who are being chased down, the Black Flash is a villain, which is why it was so crazy when after the Black Flash died, there was a time when Barry Allen had to take over, becoming the new Black Flash temporarily. Number 3. Heroes in Crisis. One of the worst times where we saw the Flash become a villain took place during Heroes in Crisis, which ultimately was a pretty interesting and suspenseful murder mystery story that also dealt with the consequences of being a hero from a mental health standpoint. So overall, this was a cool story, but it was also kind of awful in what it did to Wally. Something that most fans weren't too hot on was the big reveal of this story. A mass murder happened at the Sanctuary, killing many of the heroes who came there to take refuge and seek therapeutic help for trauma suffered both on duty as a hero and outside of that life. Initially, we were led to believe that either Booster Gold or Harley Quinn was possibly responsible, but later on it was revealed that an out-of-control Wally West was actually to blame. We had just gotten Wally back at this point, so many fans were disappointed to see him so quickly and intensely vilified, especially considering even though Wally was really to blame, it wasn't entirely his fault. He lost control of the Speed Force as a result of confronting his own trauma and his paranoia regarding the judgment surrounding said trauma while at Sanctuary. He was assuming that Sanctuary was made by the other heroes purely out of pity for him, because Wally was kind of crazy at the time after having the new reboot come about. Wally decided to break into the files and find out for himself if his suspicions were true. Then he learned that he was in fact wrong and basically became overwhelmed by the countless sessions with other heroes where they discussed their own intense and personal traumas, causing him to lose control. So of course, none of the killings had really been intentional. So it was a really tragic story. Number 2 becomes Famine. During the events of DC's Future State, we learned exactly what the future holds for Wally. And yeah, it's not good. While we might be enjoying the Flash series now, where Wally is back and most certainly not a villain, it turns out that his destiny is once again to become one of DC's most powerful and tragic supervillains. This time though, it really seems as though it was not poor Wally's fault. Is it ever his fault? I mean, his punishment of other villains is his fault, but this is so unfortunate. In Future State, Wally ends up becoming possessed by the evil entity known as Famine, becoming one of what appear to be the apocalyptic Four Horsemen. Number 1. Attack on the Teen Titans Academy. One of the atrocities that Wally committed as one of the Four Riders as Famine was that he killed a ton of faculty and students over at the Teen Titans Academy. We see this all go down in a flashback in Future State after the mysterious student Red X seemingly unleashes them on the world. Near the beginning of the first issue for Future State Teen Titans, and in a few panels in that second issue, we get to see just how many people died in this attack on the Academy, and the death toll seems to be pretty substantial. Among the fallen are fellow Titan Donna Troy and youngster Wallace West. That's right, Wally as Famine killed his own family member. It's Flashes killing other baby Flashes, you know what I mean?